In the annals of American corporate history, few names evoke the same sense of awe and infamy as Enron. From humble beginnings as a natural gas pipeline company in the 1980s, Enron transformed itself into a Wall Street darling. Through shrewd mergers, aggressive expansion, and innovative trading strategies, Enron quickly rose to become one of the largest companies in the United States. At the helm was Kenneth Lay, a charismatic executive who preached deregulation and free markets. Lay envisioned Enron dominating not just pipelines and power plants, but also broadband networks and international markets. Investors were captivated by Enron's story, driving its stock price to dizzying heights. The company's success seemed to defy gravity, with its stock price soaring even as its core businesses remained opaque. Behind Enron's dazzling facade, a far more sinister reality was taking shape. The company's success was built on accounting fraud and financial manipulation. Jeffrey Skilling, a brilliant but ruthless executive, joined Enron in 1990 and quickly rose through the ranks. Skilling introduced mark-to-market accounting, inflating the company's earnings and deceiving investors. Andrew Fastow, Enron's CFO, created a web of off-balance sheet entities to hide billions in debt. Together, Lay, Skilling, and Fasto orchestrated one of the most audacious financial frauds in corporate history. Despite the company's facade of success, cracks began to appear. Whispers of accounting irregularities and questionable business practices circulated among industry insiders. Some analysts raised concerns about Enron's complex financial statements, which lacked transparency. These early warning signs were largely ignored by investors caught up in the hype. Enron's success created a dangerous aura of invincibility, blinding many to the underlying fraud. The company's fate now rested on a At the heart of Enron's scheme was mark-to-market accounting. This method allowed Enron to book potential future profits as current income, even if those profits were uncertain. Enron embraced mark-to-market accounting with fervor, particularly in its energy trading operations. The practice gave the illusion of rapid growth and soaring profits, fueling Enron's stock price. The danger lay in its reliance on assumptions and projections, often inflated by executives. The seeds of Enron's downfall were sown in this disconnect between fabricated profits and true financial health. Enron's use of mark-to-market accounting transformed its financial statements into fiction. Profits were conjured out of thin air, based on optimistic projections. To sustain this illusion, Enron needed a constant stream of new deals to book as revenue. The company embarked on a spree of acquisitions and investments, venturing far beyond its core energy business. Behind this facade, Enron's actual financial performance was deteriorating. The pressure to maintain the illusion of profitability led to increasingly risky and fraudulent accounting practices. As Enron's financial shenanigans spiraled out of control, executives grew adept at concealing their tracks. They created a web of off-balance sheet entities, or SPEs, to hide billions in debt. These SPEs, often controlled by Enron executives, were shell companies with no real operations. Enron transferred risky assets to these entities, making its financial position appear healthier. The use of SPEs allowed Enron to maintain its credit rating and borrow vast sums of money. Each new SPE added complexity and opacity, setting the stage for a dramatic Imagine a magician making objects vanish into thin air. That's what Enron did with its debt, using SPEs as its magic hat. Enron's SPEs were empty shells, holding toxic assets to maintain the appearance of a strong balance sheet. The web of transactions between Enron and its SPEs was deliberately convoluted. This lack of transparency was crucial for Enron to prop up its stock price and secure favorable loans. However, this house of cards built on accounting gimmicks could not stand forever. The architect of Enron's SPE network was Andrew Fastow, the company's CFO. Fastow, a master of financial engineering, pulled the strings of Enron's manipulations. Fastow's SPEs were active participants in schemes to generate artificial profits and inflate stock prices. In a conflict of interest, I managed several SPEs, overseeing deals between myself and Enron. Fastow's SPEs became a breeding ground for accounting fraud and self-dealing. The line between legitimate business practices and outright fraud disappeared in a haze of greed and For a time, Enron's facade of success held firm. Investors, seduced by the company's soaring stock price, turned a blind eye to warning signs. Whispers of accounting irregularities began to circulate among analysts and journalists. One skeptic, Bethany McLean of Fortune magazine, questioned Enron's success in her article, "Is Enron overpriced?" McLean's article raised uncomfortable questions about Enron's accounting practices. Her investigation marked a turning point, challenging the narrative of Enron as a corporate titan. As scrutiny of Enron intensified, the company's house of cards began to crumble. The domino effect started with the departure of CEO Jeffrey Skilling in August 2001. Skilling's exit left me, Kenneth Lay, to deal with mounting pressure from investors and regulators. The SEC launched a formal investigation into Enron's accounting practices. As Enron's true financial condition came to light, the company's stock price plummeted. The collapse of Enron was imminent, threatening to take down its auditors, bankers, and the entire system of corporate governance. Enron's ambitions extended beyond accounting fraud to controlling energy markets. Their playground was the deregulated energy markets, ripe for manipulation. Enron's traders exploited loopholes and manipulated supply and demand to their advantage. One tactic, megawatt laundering, involved routing electricity through states to avoid oversight and sell it back at inflated prices. These manipulations had real-world consequences, contributing to blackouts and energy shortages. Enron treated essential utilities like pawns, leaving a trail of economic damage and public outrage. The most egregious example of Enron's manipulation was the California energy crisis of 2000 to 2001. Enron's traders created shortages by shutting down power plants or exporting electricity, sending prices soaring. Recordings revealed traders' callous disregard for the suffering they inflicted. They joked about stealing money from consumers and celebrated as prices spiked. The California energy crisis demonstrated the dangers of unchecked corporate greed. It tarnished the reputation of deregulation and left a lasting scar on the state's economy. Enron's manipulations weren't limited to domestic markets. They saw opportunity in chaos and sought to replicate their success on a global scale. From India to Europe, Enron pursued ambitious projects, often with disastrous consequences. In India, Enron built a massive power plant that quickly became mired in controversy. Accusations of corruption, environmental violations, and inflated electricity prices plagued the project, ultimately leading to its collapse and leaving the Indian government with billions of dollars in debt. Enron's expansion into international markets was fueled by the same hubris and disregard for ethical boundaries that characterized their domestic operations. They sought to exploit regulatory loopholes, bribe officials, and bend markets to their will, regardless of the consequences for others. Their downfall, however, was as swift as their rise. As scrutiny intensified, and the truth about their accounting fraud came to light, their carefully constructed empire began to crumble. The house of cards, built on a foundation of lies, was about to come crashing down, exposing the depth of their deception and the complicity of those who aided. In the intricate tapestry of Enron's deception, Arthur Andersen, one of the world's most prestigious accounting firms, played a pivotal, yet deeply troubling role, tasked with safeguarding the integrity of Enron's financial statements and ensuring compliance with accounting standards. Andersen instead became entangled in a web of conflicts of interest and a culture of complacency that ultimately enabled the fraud to flourish. How could a firm with a century-long legacy of accounting rigor become so deeply complicit in one of the most audacious financial frauds in history? The answer lies in a toxic cocktail of greed, negligence, and a failure of corporate governance at the highest levels. Arthur Andersen's relationship with Enron was more than just that of a typical auditor-client dynamic. Enron was a cash cow for Andersen, generating not only substantial audit fees, but also lucrative consulting contracts. This duality of roles created an inherent conflict of interest, compromising Andersen's ability to provide objective and independent audits. As Enron's accounting maneuvers grew increasingly complex and questionable, Anderson's auditors either failed to grasp the full extent of the fraud or, more disturbingly, chose to turn a blind eye. Internal memos and emails later revealed a culture of deference to Enron's demands, with auditors often pressured to prioritize client satisfaction over accounting integrity. Enron's web of deception extended beyond the confines of its Houston headquarters, ensnaring some of the nation's most prestigious law firms in its intricate scheme. These legal powerhouses, instead of serving as gatekeepers of corporate law and ethical conduct, became willing accomplices, providing legal cover for Enron's increasingly dubious financial maneuvers. Law firms, attracted by Enron's deep pockets and the prestige of representing a corporate titan, readily provided legal opinions and structured complex transactions that enabled the company to circumvent regulations and conceal its true financial condition. They became architects of obfuscation, drafting contracts for Enron's web of special-purpose entities, and crafting legal arguments to justify their questionable accounting practices. One prominent example is the law firm Vinson & Elkins, which provided legal advice on several of Enron's most controversial special-purpose entities. Despite internal concerns raised by some lawyers about the legality and ethical implications of these entities, Vinson & Elkins ultimately provided Enron with the legal cover it needed to proceed with its schemes. The involvement of these law firms in the Enron scandal raises serious questions about the legal profession's ethical obligations and the role of lawyers in facilitating corporate misconduct. It highlights the dangers of a legal culture that prioritizes client demands and financial gain over professional integrity and the public interest. Wall Street's most powerful investment banks played a crucial role in fueling Enron's rise and enabling its fraudulent activities. Lured by the promise of hefty fees and the allure of association with a Wall Street darling, these financial institutions abandoned their due diligence and became complicit in perpetuating Enron's deception. Investment banks, such as Merrill Lynch, Citigroup and J.P. Morgan, acted as Enron's financial enablers, structuring complex financing deals, underwriting stock offerings, and providing the company with access to vast sums of capital. They facilitated Enron's growth through mergers and acquisitions, often structuring deals in ways that masked the company's true financial risks. These banks also played a key role in promoting Enron's stock to investors, often issuing glowing research reports that touted the company's prospects while downplaying or ignoring any red flags. Their analysts, incentivized by the lucrative investment banking business Enron generated, turned a blind eye to the company's questionable accounting practices and inflated earnings. The Enron scandal exposed the dark underbelly of Wall Street's culture of greed and complicity. It revealed how the pursuit of profit, coupled with a lack of regulatory oversight, could corrupt even the most venerable financial institutions, leading them to prioritize their own financial interests over the interests of it. The collapse of Enron in December 2001 sent shockwaves throughout the global financial system. Exposed as a colossal fraud, Enron's dazzling facade shattered under its own deceit. The implosion left countless investors, employees, and communities devastated. The full extent of Enron's malfeasance became horrifyingly clear. Enron's bankruptcy wiped out billions in shareholder value and decimated employee savings. Legal battles culminated in the convictions of key Enron executives. The scandal triggered reforms to restore public trust and prevent future fraud. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 imposed stricter accounting rules, and the implosion of Enron left an indelible mark on the American corporate landscape, eroding public trust in big business. It exposed deep flaws in a system that allowed massive fraud to flourish. The pursuit of profit, unchecked by ethics, had devastating consequences. Enron became a cautionary tale about corporate greed. It highlighted the complicity of gatekeepers and the human cost of financial fraud. Enron became a cultural touchstone, symbolizing corporate malfeasance. Reforms like Sarbanes-Oxley strengthened governance, but Enron's shadow remains. The 2008 financial crisis showed lessons of Enron were not fully learned. Enron underscores the need for ethical leadership, transparency, and